all of these anti-gender services are there. They're much more sophisticated than what we knew in the past. They're not weird, creepy things that are just, they're really well conceived, and they've developed an infrastructure which is still at a pilot project, or they're operating at local community or in religious communities now, but they're ready to be scaled up given the funding.
Hello, welcome to the Famous Podcast. Today I have the great pleasure of welcoming Neil Datta. Neil is the Executive Director of the European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights. It's a group based in Brussels that supports parliamentarians in Europe who want to advance sexual and reproductive rights, and it provides them with technical assistance, information, and guidance for their work at local level, regional level, and also at the global level. And Neil has been following the far right as it engages with issues of sexual and reproductive health and rights for many years. So he's going to tell us today what to expect from the Trump administration, what we're already seeing unfold in terms of the Trump administration's attacks on human rights, global health, foreign assistance, international diplomacy, and international norms. So both what we're seeing, but also what we should expect in the next few months and years. Okay, let's talk to Neil. Hello, Neil. It's a pleasure to welcome you on the Famous Podcast. And today we're going to talk about something which unfortunately we have to talk about these days, which is the chaos that's been unleashed by the Trump administration on reproductive rights and gender equality globally. And you just put out a report, Beyond the Chaos, that tries to make sense of all of this. And I found it incredibly informative, very short and well done. And I think it would be of great interest to our listeners today. So you wrote this in February, and time goes very fast these days. And at that time in February, there was a frenzy of executive orders that were coming out of the White House in Washington. And these executive orders were attacking foreign assistance, global health, human rights. And we had the so-called DOGE, department. It's not a real department, but the Department of Government Efficiency, dismantling actual departments of the U.S. government. And frankly, all of us didn't know where to look. I mean, our collective heads were spinning. So what was your purpose in writing this report? Was it to try to make sense of what was going on, to help people think more clearly?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Françoise, and thank you for having me on Famous. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yes.
So in terms of the report I wrote, Beyond the Chaos, I think there's a few points of origin for this. I mean, one, I've been in this field like you have for more than 20 years. So we've seen this coming, so we knew a part of what to expect. Okay, we knew the defunding and all of that.
Yeah.
A second part of that is that I've been in the process recently of updating one of the reports that we have on anti-gender, mainly focusing on Europe, but it's transnational in its nature. So I'd been really deep into this for the past year or so, and we're going to come out with a new report in June. And so I could see some of the things that were likely to happen. And with Trump, they just became accelerated. And then finally, with us, we're not that impacted by the funding losses. So I think all of that made us have perhaps a clearer vision of what was actually happening. We weren't suffering financially ourselves, and we had been really neck deep into trying to understand this anti-gender movement. And at one point, when I saw everything happening coming from the United States, a certain moment of clarity hit me, saying, well, this, on the one hand, this destruction that we're seeing is purposeful. It has a motivation beyond just the destruction. It's meant to create a smokescreen for what they actually want to achieve. And so I think we recognize it for this. And then separately, this is not the end of it. The destruction is only the beginning. Then from what we had been studying over the past year or so with the anti-gender research, the next thing likely to happen is what we call
Consolidation.
consolidation. So that would be really consolidation, yeah. Really putting in place the policies, both domestically and internationally, that would bring forward anti-gender policies. Okay, at international level, this is the Geneva Consensus Declaration with an implementation framework called Protocol, and then also there's different ideas for what they can do domestically or in a national setting, such as abstinence-only education, natural family planning, etc. And then finally, the third phase, which I think is the most worrisome, and I'll be happy if I'm wrong about this. If in 2 years' time we have another podcast and you say, Françoise, Neil, you were really off on that, I'll be the first one opening a bottle of champagne with you. But but if we could, that third phase is what I call creation, where in the research that we've been doing over the past year, one thing we've come across is a whole series of actual programmable services which go against sexual and reproductive health and rights. So for lack of a better word, we've called them anti-gender services. And these are, we're used to the anti-gender far right contesting human rights and sexuality and reproduction. We know they don't like abortion. They're not really keen on contraception. They don't like fertility treatments. We know this. But usually we haven't looked at beyond the contestation that they do. Whereas now they have developed programmable alternatives to all of these sexual and reproductive health and rights services. So if you don't like contraception, we give you natural family planning. You don't like fertility treatments, we'll give you NAPRO technologies. You don't like abortion, we have crisis pregnancy centers. We don't like LGBT inclusion, we have a solution for that. It's called reintegrative therapy. It's the same as gay conversion therapy, but a bit softer. It's the Coke light of the Coke. And so this is what we fear will be implemented in the third phase.
So this destruction, consolidation, creation framework I find very interesting and very scary also, to be honest, especially the creation part, the third part, which we'll discuss a bit more now. But let's get back to the first part of what's going on, the destruction that's been going on. As you say, in Europe, you haven't been exposed to it as much, but it really, that section describes very succinctly the wreckage, of those first few weeks. But you wrote this in February. Now we're in May. Like, given what has unfolded, what do you think has been the destruction has been, I think, bigger than we anticipated, quite frankly. It's gone much beyond some of the things we knew they were going to cut. What do you think has been the most damaging part of all of this in the last few weeks?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of destruction, we knew that the funding cuts were going to happen. What I did not expect was the attempted dismantlement of USAID.
Right.
Okay. And now I'm not too sure where this has landed in the courts. I think it's been blocked to a certain extent, but to what extent it's blocked, to what extent USAID can come back is very uncertain. My feeling is that they've broken something which cannot be fixed in the near future.
Right.
So whatever is left that may be called USAID in the future will not resemble what USAID was that we've known over the past 60 years or so. So that's really one thing that surprised me. One thing that scares me a lot is the attempted dismantlement of the Department of Education. What this signals about what they have in mind for the American population is frightening. Because with the dismantlement of the Department of Education, it sends the issue back to the states, and there's not going to be as much funding available. And what this does is that it opens up a huge market of the whole American school-aged population for private education, homeschooling, and this private education will be mainly, or a big part of it will be faith-based private education.
Right, religious schools.
Exactly. So I think, and this represents a setback for the educational possibilities of young Americans, which is monumental. Okay. Another thing that I think is really frightening is the dismantlement or the end of funding for Radio Liberty Europe.
Right.
Uh, so if we take a look at all of these things, and if we add them up together, it's the United States turning away from international development, including the SDG framework, which was already challenged by the United States at the Commission on the Status of Women and the Commission on Population and Development. So turning away from international development and the agreed UN framework, turning away from promoting democracy around the world. That's a big thing that should scare Americans and everybody else. And turning away from public education of its own people.
Right.
And
Right.
then, in addition, you have the appointments as a health secretary of RFK Jr. and things like this, turning away from evidence-based education, pulling out of WHO. So all of these things, there's too many of them to mention. I'm forgetting some of them.
Right.
But it's really, all of these added together are very frightening.
Yeah, and would you say I would say, but I'm wondering what you would say, that it's gone even much beyond what we expected, and we didn't expect anything good from Trump 2.0. You know, you and I have followed these people for a long time, so we're quite realistic. And I read Project 2025, so I knew they intended to do some of this. But even in Project 2025, it doesn't go as far as this. Like, there's no
Yeah.
dismantling of USAID there. I mean, they did want to stop a number of programs and then reprogram them to promote the traditional family and all that, but not this kind of gutting of foreign assistance that leaves, you know, very few awards in place and like 300 staff, you know, which is bare bones, and maybe you barely can operate that way. One of the things you mentioned is that there's the administration has been dragged into courts, right? You know, because all of this is actually illegal, right? Since Congress had appropriated the money for these activities, and you cannot just by executive order overturn that. But the courts are much slower than the administration has been. So the courts can, you know, only react to what's happening and have not been able to really put a stop to it, because the administration also disregards court decisions and appeals them and drags it out. And so what you're saying is that we're looking at a long-term reconfiguration of the USA's engagement in all of these areas: international affairs, international human rights, humanitarian assistance, foreign assistance, the international legal order. I mean, that as we understood it since the Second World War. I mean, that's it,
Yeah,
right? That's what we're talking about.
exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I think also we should understand that this is the United States retreating from this international order. It's not just Donald Trump as president or even the Republican Party. I mean, these issues are being supported by a significant percentage of the American population. They're not encountering that much resistance.
Right.
And so I think this is, in a way, it reminds me as a European of Brexit, okay? Where it is something that is highly regrettable. We can see the damage it's causing, but at the same time, we're helpless to do anything about it. We can watch this thing happening, and we'll just have to make do with it. And this is a permanent change that is taking place. We can see at one level the folly of it, because the United States will end up weaker, okay, as a result of this. And so will, you know, all democratic countries. But it is happening.
Yeah.
And I think we need to program ourselves to understand that the US will not be a partner in the same way as it was before, in favor of democracy, global health, women's rights, equality, and things like that.
Right, which is, I think, been hard for some people to believe. I don't know if you find that in Europe, that some people have just had a very hard time coming to terms with this.
Yeah, I mean, Europeans have been quicker to act on this than I expected. And I think that's in part thanks to Vice President J.D. Vance's speech in Munich, where he basically criticized Europeans on a range of different issues, including, for example, at the Munich Security Conference, it's about to be about big global geopolitical issues and security. He criticized the government of Scotland because they enforce buffer zones around abortion clinics. So this was one of the things that made it into that, which
Mm-hmm.
is one of the talking points of this Christian right organization, Alliance Defending Freedom International.
Right.
So I think, I mean, that type of thinking reaches the White House, and now it's coming out in geopolitical speeches.
Right.
But with that said, I mean, I think at that conference, and then the ongoing back and forth about how the US was dealing with the Ukraine situation, that catastrophic meeting in the Oval Office between
Mm.
Trump, Vance, and Zelensky
Yeah.
made Europeans wake up within a week or so that the US was fundamentally different and at least was not there in terms of a guarantor of security.
Mm-hmm.
That means for NATO, etc. But then also with that comes its place in upholding democracy, the rule of law, and then our issues, gender equality, reproductive health and rights fall within that.
Yeah, and
I
of
mean,
course, I mean, you and I are not naive about the U.S.'s role in all of this over the years. That
mhm,
the U.S. has not always been, uh, shall we say, a fully honest actor in a lot of these cases. With human
mhm.
rights, upholding human rights in theory, but then doing other things in practice. But nevertheless, what you're saying is, I think, very important. It's not just any random country here doing this. It's the United States of America, which, as a result of the arrangements after the Second World War, has a very unique role in a lot of international institutions and in the global
Yeah, I
order,
mean,
right?
exactly. I mean, whether we like it or not, and the French in me is
Mm-hmm.
pained by having to say this, but I mean, we have to recognize that the US was the pillar of the Western liberal order that upheld democracy and human rights.
Yeah,
And now it's decided not to play that role anymore.
yeah.
So I think we need to recognize this, and then this has a consequence on every other country that wants to uphold democracy and human rights. That we need a different way of consolidating ourselves.
So, speaking about the next phase of what's happening, you call this consolidation, where you discuss the new ideological framework the US is pushing through international
Mhm.
channels, including at the Munich Security Conference. And that involves combating, the so-called gender ideology and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and promoting the Geneva Consensus Declaration. Can you say a bit more about what this Geneva Consensus Declaration is about for my listeners who don't know it,
Yep.
and what can we expect from that posture?
Yeah. So the Geneva Consensus Declaration is something that dates back to the first Trump administration. So it's been around for a couple of years. And it's basically a fake UN document. It's written in UN language, but it's not related to any UN thing, except that it was perhaps signed and agreed in a room on UN premises, rented and paid for by one of the member states. But so that's the only UN connection, but it's a fake UN sounding document, basically, which asserts that there is no international human right to abortion. That's the starting aspect of it.
Right.
And then from that, it goes on to develop positions against a whole range of sexual and reproductive health and rights. And so, as it stands now, I mean, it was an element of the Trump-Pence diplomacy back during the first administration, and they were able to get some 35 countries to sign up to it. Okay, it never really went anywhere except to say, well, we have 35 countries with us to say that abortion is not an international human right, and which is not difficult to get since most of the countries who are signatories to this, for them, abortion in their domestic legal framework is not really accessible. Okay, so it reflects the status quo. After Trump lost after his first term, the Geneva Consensus Declaration didn't disappear, but no one did anything about it on the progressive side. But in the meantime, the Hungarian government took it up, and they kept it warm for the 4 years of the Biden presidency, and they got a few extra countries to sign up to it. And so now that Trump is back in office, there is this document there with a potential coalition of 35 plus countries that can be used in different UN settings to counter demands made by progressive countries and other groups in order to advance on sexual and reproductive health and rights. And now one clue that we have that they plan to use this is what happened at the Commission on Population and Development in April this year,
At the
where the United
UN.
States and Hungary uh, organized a meeting of member states around the Geneva Consensus Declaration so as to build awareness and understanding of their position on this. So it gives them basically an organizing platform with potentially 30 some odd countries that are ready to go along with them in varying degrees in order to counter sexual and reproductive health and rights claims. So that's one aspect of the Geneva Consensus Declaration. It can be used at diplomatic level. A second thing that I think we need to be very careful about is that the Geneva Consensus Declaration comes with an operational framework. So the pen behind the Geneva Consensus Declaration is an American woman called Valerie Huber, who runs the International Women's Health Institute, something like that. It's a fake women's health institute. Well, it's a real legal entity, but about fake women's health. They've developed an operational program called Protego, with the subtag reading Protego, the Women's Optimal Health Framework, or WOOF. Yes.
You can't make this up. Yes.
I mean, and which then it's a 70-page document which articulates how countries can implement this optimal women's health framework, and which is there where you see that instead of access to modern contraception, family planning, instead of comprehensive sexuality education, abstinence-based only education, so on and so forth. So I think one thing we need to look for is whatever rump is left of USAID, okay, because it looks like something will be there, okay, something of 300-400 people, okay. What this means is that USAID cannot implement large-scale programs the way it used to when it had 12, 13,000 people. But with 300-400 people, you can have a number of program managers managing a budget. And so then they can then give this money to ideologically aligned organizations to then implement certain projects which would fall within a Protego framework. And what we've been seeing is that a number of these different potential projects are already getting ready. There's one which is an abstinence-based sexuality education program called Teen Star. It's operating in a number of different countries. It's being taken up by the government of Prime Minister Orban in Hungary. President Milei announced that he was going to also mainstream it in Argentina.
Oof.
They held a meeting in Nairobi in November of last year in order to adapt the Teen Star abstinence framework to African culture. So once that's done, it's already operating at local level in some African countries. If there's an injection of new American money there, it can really scale up. And same thing with natural family planning programs. This would be done via, for example, there's one that we're looking at, a natural family planning program, which is done via an application, an app, and which is already operating in about 10, 12 different countries in as many different languages, including in Swahili, operating in Tanzania.
Wow.
So this can be scaled up relatively quickly. You just need an injection of money, and the infrastructure is there. And I mean, I'm sure you'll remember the first Bush administration. There were these abstinence-only programs.
Yes.
And I remember at that time, there was this really weird, creepy one coming from the United States called the silver ring thing.
Yes. Yes.
And which is where a young girl, an adolescent girl, would pledge to her father that she would remain chaste until marriage,
Yes.
and then he would put a silver ring on her finger.
Aye.
Creepy, creepy, creepy. Now these programs, they've been able to co-opt the vocabulary of sexual and reproductive health and rights organizations very cynically, so that they talk about promoting women's health and choices and things like this, but it's all towards that one choice which they deem acceptable. And they've been convincing so that this one natural family planning app that I was talking about, it received in 2022 a grant of 400,000 euros from the European Commission.
How come?
So because they were able to convince people that it's actually promoting women's health.
Oh my goodness.
I think we need to be mindful that all of these anti-gender services are there, they're much more sophisticated than what we knew in the past.
Mm-hmm.
They're not weird, creepy things that are just, they're really well conceived, and they've developed an infrastructure which is still at a pilot project, or they're operating at local community or in religious communities now, but they're ready to be scaled up given the funding.
So if people are not aware, let's say people making grants at the European Commission, you're saying they could easily be persuaded that this is part of the panoply of programs that should be offered to women. You know, that access to natural family planning methods is a legitimate choice amongst many, but they don't understand that this isn't about providing a true choice. It's about displacing modern methods of
Exactly.
contraception that are effective with things like, monitoring your temperature and all
Mhm.
those good things that used to get women pregnant, still do get pregnant
Exactly.
at a very high rate because they don't work, right? They're
Mhm.
not effective as,
Exactly. I
yeah.
mean, exactly. I mean, most of these services, they were conceptualized for faith-based communities
Mm-hmm.
because of their inherent restrictions with proper sexual and reproductive health and rights services. So if that's what people willingly choose, that's one thing. But if we then take a look at what's one of the consequences of the dismantlement of USAID, okay? USAID was the largest international development agency in the world.
Yeah.
And in the field of sexual and reproductive health and rights, and specifically modern family planning, it accounts for approximately 1/3 of all the donated contraceptives in the global south.
Wow. And those are gone now.
Okay. So I was just in South Africa last week, so it's not gone yet, but it's a question of weeks and months before it goes out.
Yeah.
Um, what's the scale is too vast for any other donor or collection of donors to pick up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not even a question of funding or just funding, because a lot of the USAID officials, they're the ones that actually procured the contraceptives for the national health systems in countries where they were operating. So
Mm-hmm.
that there's not yet the local capacity to do the procurement and then how to bring the products into the country
Uh-huh. The
that USAID
logistics
used to
and,
do.
yeah, the supply
Exactly,
chain management was done by the US government
exactly.
on behalf of those countries with their money, but yeah, yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's gone
Wow.
now.
Mm.
Okay. And so I think we need to understand the scale of what will likely happen in the next couple of months. And so then the US will promote natural family planning because there'll just be an absence of contraceptives.
Mm.
So I think we need to be mindful that in the next couple of months, we're likely to see what is likely to be a silent epidemic of increased maternal mortality, increased STIs, HIV/AIDS, simply because the contraceptives aren't there.
Yeah.
But it will be hard to pick up in the beginning because it all happens at the individual level, and then you need a certain lag, time delay for this to appear in the statistics.
Right. And I mean, this in a way is not, it's terrifying, okay. But it fits in with what we've seen since the first Bush administration. You're absolutely right. And even the Reagan administration, which is really to promote faith-based organizations and funnel money to them. Now,
Mhm.
there used to be more obstacles in the way of that, given the USAID's mandate and the dedicated civil servants there, but now they've gotten rid of them. So there's really very
Mhm.
little in the way of obstacles for this kind of money being poured into these programs.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, and now it hasn't happened yet under this
Mm-hmm.
administration, but under previous Republican administrations, there was examples of this happening,
Yes.
and this one is not more shy than previous Republican administrations. So I think it's just a question of months before we start seeing this.
Right, right. Yeah, there was the faith-based organization office in the White House under the
Mhm.
Bush administration, W's administration. So this has been in the works in one way or the other for a
Yeah.
long time. It's now they're capable of actually doing it. And so that's
Yeah.
the creation part that you're describing, the third phase, where
Mhm.
entirely new organizations or organizations that have been on the back burner for a while are able to really stand up with significant money to promote this vision, very traditional vision of sexual and reproductive health and gender,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, yeah,
Exactly, yeah.
yeah.
And
That's
I mean, yeah, and I mean, if we just think also these organizations don't provide actual services. They're not purchasing anything. Okay, so all they have to do is advocacy and behavior change, outreach, and so they can reach many more people than a traditional sexual reproductive health and rights organization, which has to do the advocacy and behavior change, but they need a product which costs money behind it.
right, right. Like, for example, I mean, if you're providing modern contraceptives, you have to make them available. They're just telling people to, look at their cervical mucus and see whether or not they're
Exactly.
fertile at this moment, this kind of thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, in the part about consolidation of ideology, you mentioned also the fact that this new diplomacy includes the wielding of religious freedom as a sort of a super freedom or super right that would,
Yeah.
take precedence over every other human rights and civil right. And I think we saw some of that during the first Trump administration, because there was Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, his new commission on unalienable rights, which sought to really promote a different vision of human rights that really made religious freedom the
Mhm.
preeminent right. So this
Mhm.
is coming back now. That's what you're seeing.
Yeah, this is what I suspect. It still hasn't happened yet, except we've
Mm-hmm.
had some traces of it. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so this is really erecting, as you said, religious freedom as some sort of uber human right to trump all other rights. So that my right, let's say my right as a Christian, is more important than your right as a woman to access the health care that you say you need, or the health or of a sexual minority to be protected from hate speech, etc. Okay. There's already been traces of that this is something that they want to put forward. So Vice President Vance has said that religious freedom would be one of the issues that he would pick up, similar to his predecessor, Vice President Pence. And also, as I mentioned earlier, he referenced this situation in Scotland of a legal case concerning protesters in front of an abortion clinic.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these protesters come from the US organization 40 Days for Life. And in Scotland and in a few other places, they adopted buffer zones around abortion clinics. This is being contested in courts, in part thanks to a US Christian right organization called Alliance Defending Freedom,
Mm-hmm.
which, by the way, Speaker Mike Johnson used to be an attorney at Alliance Defending Freedom. Um, and uh, and so this made it into the Munich security speech.
Yeah.
So I think we can see that they're already raising this to a high level.
Mm-hmm.
Related to religious freedom is also freedom of speech, and basically having an unregulated social media where people can say anything, similar to what Elon Musk has done with X
Yeah.
compared to what Twitter used to be. And again, that is something that Vice President Vance raised again during his Munich security speech when he critiqued the cancellation of the Romanian presidential elections that took place late last year because they were overwhelmed by Russian disinformation
Mm-hmm.
favoring the far-right candidate.
Right.
And so I think here we have an indication that freedom of speech should be completely unregulated, even in the face of state-sponsored disinformation attempting to influence the outcome of the politics in a specific country, and as well as freedom of religion, which would be erected as an uber human right.
Right. And this isn't good. Like, this so-called freedom of speech is really favorable to people who are prepared to lie, the trolls, the robots, as you say, the flow of disinformation that comes out of certain
Mhm.
state actors like Russia. And it's really,
Yeah.
we've seen how the damage has been tremendous to democracy, of course, but also to women's rights, LGBTQ rights. I mean, there's been,
Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, there was a study done by the European Union's External Action Service. So this is the European Union's equivalent for like the um, the branch that does foreign affairs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So imagine the administration under a foreign affairs ministry, that's the European Union's External Action Service. They did a study on foreign disinformation affecting the European Union. And they found that 55% of the disinformation targeting the LGBTI community came from the Russian Federation.
Wow.
And this is meant specifically to divide societies and to polarize them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So all the attacks on trans people and all that, that's, yeah.
exactly. And there was another study. This was an academic study that looked at the 2017 period that found that it was Russian, Venezuelan, and Iranian active disinformation measures that targeted the feminist movement and the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States, simply with the aim of amplifying polarization and differences within the feminist and Black Lives Matter movement. So I think we need to understand that progressive issues are being targeted and progressive communities and movements by foreign state actors with the malign aim of creating divisions within Western societies.
Right. And now we have the US government doing the same, basically, right? Now
Exactly. Yeah. And
putting
what we
out.
have is, yeah, I mean, what we have is basically a fifth column in every democratic society that seeks to benefit from this polarization.
And now we have it in government in the US, right?
Yes.
With all the
Mhm.
power and the resources. Um,
Mhm.
So, one question I have in this context, and this is very serious, dire context, what can be done? What can be done immediately to address this cycle of destruction and consolidation and creation of bogus entities? And what can we do maybe medium and long term? Are there some things that you see as clearly things we can do?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, first of all, as an overall thing that all need to recognize is that we're not dealing with a financial problem or a programmatic problem when we're talking about sexual and reproductive health and rights. Those are smaller components of a much bigger political problem. So I think that we need to diagnose the situation correctly. Okay. Um, uh, so that's the first thing. Then separately, I would say that maybe one way of organizing our thoughts about what it is that we can do is a framework that I've called the 5Ds. So it's 5 points. Each one starts with a D. One of them would be to work on discovering. So really researching what, the problems that we're facing. I mean, I've been asked this question by civil society organizations, academics, or governments, or politicians. The answer for each one is different, but one thing that they have in common is that they can spend effort on research. For example, I was part of a team uh, organized by the Belgian government to try to write a report on the anti-gender phenomenon in Belgium.
Yeah.
Okay, so different countries can do this. So discover. Once you've spent the intellectual effort in understanding what's happening, then you will be in a better position to do the next D, which is disarm, because then you will recognize who the different actors are, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and you'll be able to anticipate what they do. Okay, so that like this, if certain groups are good at litigation, you know that you need to be prepared for that. Others are good at social media mobilization through petitions, etc. Then you'll know how to protect yourself from that, and you can then warn decision makers, policymakers, media practitioners about who these groups are and how to protect
Right.
oneself from them. This then brings me to the third point, which is to dislocate them insofar as possible. Now, in the US, it's a bit challenging until the midterms, but these groups seek access to positions of power. Once we're able to know who they are, because they all have nice, cuddly names. They're not the International Confederation of Right-Wing People who hate everything. They, the Alliance Defending Freedom, European, no, the World Youth Alliance, or things like that.
Sounds legit, right?
Um, yeah, so they seek access to power and places that are close to power. So if we're able to identify them, we can try to deny them access to those positions. A fourth point would be to try to demonetize them.
Mm.
And so this means also understanding what their funding base is and trying to limit that.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them benefit from state support, including from progressive European countries. I mean, for example, it's some of the groups in Uganda that pushed for this anti-homosexuality bill were receiving funding from Nordic countries, from Canada, from not for the anti-LGBT stuff, but for religious freedom stuff.
Oh,
Okay.
God.
Uh, so we need to be mindful of this, and there's a space for actors to be playing a watchdog role on
Mm.
this issue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then finally, defend. And that's perhaps very important. And that takes two parts. One is to defend the frontline people who have to deal with this, so that those who are there, upholding, demonstrating for women's access to abortion, like our friends in Poland were demonstrating on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
Those frontline family planning service providers in the global south, or those working in the United States, so those who are being interrogated or harassed by the Trump administration. We need to see if we can do something to protect them.
Right.
But then also at a more medium-term level, we need to take a look carefully at what we think are human rights and ask ourselves whether these are adequately legally protected. Okay. If we take a look at least in the vast majority of European countries, which claim to be progressive,
Mm-hmm.
if we take a look at the issue of abortion, abortion is not legally a human right. It remains a crime that will go unpunished if performed under certain circumstances.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Now, is this a woman's right to abortion that we want to have? And so this is why, for example, last year I was very involved in the French process of enshrining abortion into the constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Pe- countries should be thinking about this. Now, this was a solution for France.
Mm.
It's not necessarily a solution for Canada or the United Kingdom, but everybody should be taking a look at their human rights that they think are very important, and asking themselves whether these are bulletproof in case the far right can come into power in their own country.
Right.
And from what I can see, the far right parties stand a chance of coming into power in almost any democratic country.
Mm-hmm.
You escaped it recently in Canada,
Yeah.
but it seems to me part of the credit for that electoral outcome is in fact owed to President Trump,
Right.
because had he not said certain things, the outcome could have been different.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
Threatening to annex Canada didn't. Yeah, it was very helpful
exactly.
in clarifying the issues. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in France, we had early elections last year. We almost had a far-right government.
Yes.
And so all of us, we're in the same boat. We're one or two elections away from a potential accident.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to think, if that accident happens, how are we prepared to deal with this?
That's right. That's right. And I think, thank you for mentioning abortion laws, because in general, they're pretty bad. Yeah, you're right. There's still criminal laws that have all these exemptions and these loopholes
Yeah.
and so on, but they're not really rethinking the status of abortion as a human
Mhm.
right, or at least as something that shouldn't be in the criminal code, period, right? So, yeah,
Mhm. Yeah.
definitely.
I mean, they date to another period where, I mean, it represents the societal consensus of that time, which
That's
is
right.
fine. But we're now, usually 40, 50, 60 years past that. So we need to reassess
Mm-hmm.
that consensus
Mm-hmm.
and see whether we need to modernize these laws. I mean, back when these laws were adopted, I mean, it was almost a medically proven fact that women could get hysterical. I mean, so I think science has evolved since then.
Right, right. So, yeah, and defending the people who are on the front lines, but also really analyzing the situation and saying, okay, what measures do we need to take to prevent the worst, right? Yeah.
Sure. Mhm.
Well, this is a sobering conversation, but it's a necessary conversation. And the report, I urge everyone to request the report if they
Yeah.
haven't done so already, because it's really helpful to imagine what we'll have to guard against and mobilize against, and
Mhm.
to keep an eye on what the right wing will do with the vast resources of the U.S. government.
Yeah.
It can be. I think it's hard to imagine how different things could be in a few years as a result. So let's prepare.
Yes,
Thank you,
exactly.
Neil. Thank you so much for
Thank
your
you for
time. Thank you and your insights. A luta continua.
thank you.
Thank
Merci.
you. Merci.